There we go. It says I'm live. All right, welcome to the stream, everybody. This week we're going to be talking about what we were talking about last week. This is part 2 of last week. If you didn't join us last week, let me catch you up. We were talking about this chart, okay? How to convert emotions from their negative forms into their positive forms. And I think this week's going to be better than last week because I love Richard Rudd. He's the one who created this, but his stuff takes a little bit of explanation. So just looking at the chart, there's a lot of these that are kind of difficult to understand. So last week we were kind of bouncing around and some of them made sense and some of them didn't. And so this time I went through them and I found the ones that really make a lot of sense that I feel like I can explain to you guys in a really easy way. So we're going to go through that. And then I've also found some other material that I didn't get to share last week that I was really excited about. So we're going to share that as well from Mark Passio and some other techniques of converting negative emotion into positive emotion. I'm here for you live. Anybody who's live, I'm here for you. If you're watching the recording, I love you too, but I can't interact with you live, so you got to show up live. I read all the live chats. I want to have the discussion with you guys. So just like last week, I want you to share in the chat if you have any negative emotions that you've been dealing with or you would like some help with, and we will try to find it on the chart or find a way of converting it into a positive emotion. Okay? So again, so just in the chat, I see we've got Eleanor here. Welcome. Glad you're here. Anybody else say hi? I don't know who's in the chat because I can't see it. So if you're watching live, say hi so I know you're watching, and hit that like and subscribe button, just the like button, and because I always forget to mention that later, so I'm gonna say it now before I get going. All right, so I want to talk about this chart right here, right here. So as I mentioned, it's created by Richard Rudd. I think it's useful to hear his story a little bit. So why don't we listen to him real quick?
It was in 1996. I was in my late 20s. I was living in a small cottage in south of England. And I woke up one morning into a higher state of consciousness. It was as though my whole body was just a field of light. And it was out of that state that lasted 3 days and 3 nights that I was moving through the cosmic field of truth. Extraordinary things were revealed to me in that time. Essentially, the gene keys are this code that you contemplate, and as you contemplate it, it starts to come alive inside you. What I did is All
right, so that's Richard's introduction. Basically, he had a spiritual awakening, and that set him on this path of creating this gene keys system. And it's a really awesome system. I appreciate it, especially because it's based on the I Ching, which is kind of how I found it. If you've watched this channel at all, you know I'm into Taoism. The I Ching is probably the most ancient Taoist text, and people use it to this very day to try to correct their lives. And that's what Richard is offering in this system. So what he created was there's 3 different levels, and you can see how it's on a spectrum. And the one on the left is the shadow. You can see at the bottom, he says, embrace the shadow, release the gift, embody the city. So the shadow is the one on the left, and that's like the negative form of the emotion. The gift is like what is available to us to convert the negative emotion into the city, which is the most positive aspect of the emotion. And this also connects to what we talked about 2 weeks ago. We were talking about, I'll put this over here, levels of consciousness. So in this chart, you can see at the very bottom is the lowest vibration. That's the red. Those are the shadow emotions. And then at the top, as you get closer to God, you get more of the positive emotions. And in that live stream, basically, I was making the point that every single spiritual teaching, every effort that you make as a human being, really, comes down to trying to move up this scale. So we went through some quotes and showed how a lot of them take you from things like fear, desire, anger, shame, and moves you up to courage, which is like the breaking point, and then up into willingness and acceptance, reason and love, joy and peace, and then ultimately connection with God, which is what the ultimate goal of all these different practices is. All right, we got some chats. Oh, Yeah. All right. Welcome, Zachariah. Welcome, Yale. Welcome, Matthew A. Welcome, Praise Christ Yoga. All right. Great to have you guys all here. I love it. I love having you guys here. I love hanging out with you guys. That's what this has become. And I get to share my what the ideas that I'm excited about, which is also awesome. And like I said, I'm here for you. So in the chat, just tell me. Oh, dang it. Sorry, I'm trying. I'm trying to press buttons. Hey, it's live. You know, something's gonna go wrong. Um, so as I was saying, I'm here for you guys, and whatever you want to talk about, like really whatever. I'm totally fine with kind of getting derailed on the topic. I can always come back to these topics. These will always be available to talk about. But you guys, our time together right now, that's what's really sacred to me. So any problems you're having, like I said, if there's negative emotions that you want to discuss, but even more than that, if you have any problems that, I can share my perspective with, I'm here for you. Okay. All right. Eleanor says, can you explain more the word release in release the gift? Thanks, Eleanor. Yeah, I appreciate that question. So this is why I wanted to do a part two. I wanted to redo this because, like I said, I love Richard Rudd, but his stuff kind of takes explanation, and he's written a lot of books about it. So the release the gift, I'm to be honest with you, I haven't finished all of his books, so I don't really understand what that word exactly means. And he's trying to pack so much information. Let's go back to that picture. He's trying to pack so much information into this chart. He's almost, in my opinion, trying to pack too much into the chart. But the chart is really cool because it shows us like what's possible. And that's why I circled the ones that I circled, because I feel like some of these other ones are much harder to just understand intuitively. And so I don't think it's useful to talk about them if you can understand them intuitively. I mean, if you want more, go read his book. Definitely, I've read parts of it, and he writes well, but he's got his perspective, and it's a little bit different. So let me give you my interpretation of the gift. Basically, as we were saying, you have the negative emotion on the one end of the spectrum, and then you have the positive aspect on the other end of the spectrum. He calls it the siddhi, which is a Sanskrit word for like the highest version of something. But I would say, to make it balanced, we have the shadow on the one side and then we have the light on the other side. Okay. So the light is at the one end of the spectrum and the shadow is at the other end. That gives you the yin and yang. And then the gift is like it's the tool that allows you to travel from the shadow to the light. So that is, and he calls it the gift, it's like a gift of a tool is a gift from God. These are all gifts from God or from the universe, however you want to look at it, to help us move from the shadow to the light. Okay. All right. So yeah, let's just start looking through some of these really quick. I want to show you how they are indeed intuitive, at least a lot of them. Okay. And we talked about a few of these last week, but I'm going to go through them again anyways for those of you who are just joining us, and also because I think it fits into everything we're talking about. I also excluded the ones that I found somewhat redundant. Some of these things, I don't know, I guess like here's an example: struggle and then stress, right? So struggle and stress, they kind of seem very similar to me. So I tried to avoid things that were too similar. All right, so let's go with number 4, the first one. Intolerance. Intolerance, as it's used here, it's used as, kind of like the classic way of like, don't be intolerant. Like, kind of being closed-minded and not being interested in other people's perspectives. And so the gift that can convert that is understanding. And so intolerance through understanding gets us to forgiveness. And I thought this was a great one because I'm doing a video about this stuff, but I don't have it ready. There's a quote from the Buddha that is literally sorry, I need to be on. Okay, there we go. I'm trying to use this button to switch between them. So okay. So the Buddha actually has a quote that says, "To understand everything is to forgive everything." Right? So if you truly understood everything about someone's life, and there's evidence that this happens in the life review when we see through in the afterlife, we see through other people's eyes and we have their entire perspective. And so suddenly, in a flash, you can understand someone's entire life. And so that gets you to forgiveness, okay? So that is intolerance changing into forgiveness. Impatience changing into timelessness. So here it's like, again, sometimes he uses these words and it's not that helpful. It's like, how do we cure impatience? Through patience. All right, not great. But timelessness. I believe timelessness is a perfect answer to impatience. So it's true that patience is what you need when you feel impatient. But ultimately, perhaps, at least for me, it's more helpful to think of the idea of timelessness, to really be in the present moment. I would even replace timelessness with like presence. How do we cure impatience? Through presence, through really accepting the present moment. That is, those of you know, I love Lao Tzu. That is one of his greatest quotes. Let's see if I can remember it. There is a time to live and there is a time to die, but there is never a time to reject the present moment. I feel like that's a very powerful quote for that. All right, number 6, conflict. Conflict and peace. I mean, that is very clearly opposites. We all understand that. And in the middle is diplomacy. This is kind of similar to understanding. Again, some of these kind of repeat, but you can see where diplomacy is a little bit different than understanding. It's like really working through the conflict energy, right? So with intolerance, you're just apart from someone, but with conflict, you're actively engaged with someone and you're in a battle. And so the gift that you use in that situation, if you find yourself in conflict, is diplomacy. And diplomacy requires understanding, but it also takes an effort of like reaching out to the person. And so through diplomacy, we can reach peace. Matthew A. says, think of how much you miss when you are not present. Yes. Yes, Matthew. That is an awesome point. And I feel like I am constantly reminding myself of that point. Like that is to me the spiritual work. The spiritual work is to be in the present moment without resistance. And that's what makes life difficult and challenging and exciting. Because when you are present, you can really feel God's presence. It's in the phrase, right? God's presence in the present. And you can just appreciate all the great things like the signs, the people you're with, the things you're feeling. All of them are a beautiful tapestry that makes up our experience. But we're often taken away into the past and into the future. And that is really the challenge of life, is to be able to remain present no matter what's going wrong. And that's why I'm helping you guys with this presentation. I'm pointing that way, but it's actually right here, right? I'm helping you with this presentation because all of these are designed, and I think it might be in that light, maybe we can look at the gift, the thing in the middle. I feel like that brings you into the present, right? Like the two things on the ends, the shadow and the city, as he calls it, or the light, those are kind of like the emotions we have in response. But if we can activate the things in the middle, that's when we're really in the present and we're in a positive state in the present. We're trying to help the present. We're trying to help the situation versus kind of like reacting and staying in the negative emotion. Yale says, love it. Matthew says, and never use anyways. No inside jokes, Matthew. You got to explain yourself if you're going to put that in there. So anyways, as we were saying, what's next? Inertia. Number 9, inertia and into determination, and finally invincibility. Yeah, it's fun. This one was interesting because inertia and invincibility are almost the same thing. It's like invincibility is like nothing can take you down, and invincibility is like you're just flying forward and nothing can stop you. And then inertia is like you can't get going. You can't start moving, right? They're both kind of inertia. And so how do you change inertia into invincibility? Through determination, right? Especially when you're faced with inertia or inaction in your life. It takes that inner fire. I talk about this in the elements video. Your flame, you have to turn up your own flame from the inside. And inertia also applies to so many different situations in our life where we're frustrated, we're in the same kind of patterns, just keep repeating. And ultimately, it takes determination. We have to decide to make the change. And then when we fully embody determination on a regular basis, we become invincible. Eleanor says, how do you stay in the moment when you have to act fast or manage a lot in one moment? Asking for a mom of small kids that I know. Yeah, that is tough. That is tough. I know because I also have small kids. And it's extremely challenging. And I feel like in those situations when you're overwhelmed, you have to accept that the present moment is overwhelmed. And also accept your own limitations of what you can actually do and what you can actually focus on and respond to. I know, especially with children, they make so many demands. Sometimes you have to just be like, okay, I'm the adult. I'm in charge here. They're fine. They're fed. They're not injured. Like, they're fine. Children have a tendency to kind of freak out. So you have to remain centered in yourself and be able to remain in the present. Because if your situation is pulling you out of the present, it's actually on you to make sure that you stay in the present. And that requires changing your perspective and realizing that perhaps you don't have to be acting immediately or quickly or constantly. And if you are having to act constantly, accepting that that's the state you're in and that you can't do something else, right? I think that's one of the biggest challenges to staying in the present is, and I know I have this challenge with small children, is, sometimes you're playing with your child and you should play with your child, but you're thinking about all the adult things that are, I guess, more interested than, tiddlywinks or tic-tac-toe, right? And that is one of the great challenges, I think, of being a parent is staying present with your child, because you're not really spending time with them if you're not present. And this is something that I need to work on too. It's very challenging. But that is the work, right? Does that help, Eleanor? I don't know if that was a good answer or not. I tried to hit a lot of notes there. Matthew says, anyways is a poor way of ending an awesome conversation. Yes, exactly. Yeah, saying anyways is like, sorry I brought all that up. I'm not going to talk about that anymore, right? I'm just going to totally change the subject. And I hope that you don't feel like you have to do that in your life. Especially not with me. I love talking about this stuff. Eleanor says, it's like that. You can still be a quiet hermit here in the middle of everything. Trying to be a hermit in the moment of chaos is really hard. Right. Yes. Thank you for quoting my Lao Tzu video. Yes, exactly. I love that quote. If Ryan were here, he would also say, because he commented that was his favorite quote. Maybe we should pull it up. Let's see here. I think I can pull it up really fast. Hermit. All we got to do is search for hermit. There we go. You won't have to hide away forever in spiritual retreats. You can be a gentle, contemplative hermit right here in the middle of everything, utterly unaffected, thoroughly sustained, and rewarded by your integral practices. And so this is actually the final entry, number 81 in the Wahoo Ching. And basically he's saying, it took an entire book of the Wahoo Ching to get you to this point, okay? So don't feel bad, right? It took till passage 81 to be like, okay, now I've given you all the tools. Now you can be a gentle, contemplative hermit right here in the middle of everything. So I think that is really the challenge, right? And having forgiveness for ourselves, but also like working on it. Like, this is what life has brought you. If you're faced with this challenge, it's a challenge you're supposed to meet. So yeah, that's my perspective on that. So anyways, all right. Matthew A says, staying in the moment is also about being aware of everything in the moment. I've asked that of some ER doctors. That's right. I know that Matthew works in the healthcare field. They said it takes a lot of practice to focus on the one patient at a time, but it takes intention. Intention? I think you meant intention. Yeah. I mean, being an ER doctor, I feel like that is like one of the most extreme forms of trying to do this practice, and you have to, right? If you're going to give good healthcare, and I know that people make mistakes because it's so difficult, right? If you're going to be a good doctor, if you're going to give good healthcare, you really have to be present. I feel like of all the fields, that's one in which being present is so important, right? Eleanor says, it does help, thanks. Sounds like you're saying do less to be able to stay in the present. Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I'm saying is, it's like the instructions on the airplane, like put the gas mask on your own face first before you assist even your own child, right? Because you have to make sure that you're okay at all times before you start interacting with other people. Because if you aren't okay, you're going that not okayness is going to spill over into the people around you, and it's gonna hurt your interactions. It's gonna start sending them down a path that you don't want to go, right? So yeah, and this could just be me. I feel like everybody has a different strategy. My personal response to overwhelm is to try to remember my practices, try to take a break, take a breather. Like I said, recognizing that these things don't have to happen right away, or maybe they do. And if they do, it's just, you just go with it. And I've been in those situations too, right? Like you just accept that this is how you're going to feel, but trying to make sure that you're setting up your life and you're prepared for things and you're planning so that you don't end up in that situation. Because those are the situations where we end up, as Lao Tzu says, falling backwards into darkness. I think this is a good... Oh, spelled it wrong. Darkness. Yeah. This top quote. Don't think that you can attain total awareness and whole enlightenment without proper discipline and practice. This is egomania. Appropriate rituals channel your emotions and life energy toward the light. That's what we're talking about. Channeling our energy toward the light with this chart. Without the discipline to practice them, you will tumble constantly backward into darkness. So what this reminds me, this quote, when I think of it, and I put it in my Lao Tzu video because it's such a good quote, and we all forget it, right? Especially when you've been doing the right thing, studying the right thing. But the problem is you're going to be challenged. And then if you don't meet that challenge, you're going to slip backwards. And that's just the way life is. It's kind of a harsh reality, right? Like we all wish, and it's, it's both true and false. Like, we still have our knowledge and our attainment in some ways, but if we let our old habits or poor habits, exist in our life, they're going to have negative effects. And that's what tumbling backward into darkness is. So we can't avoid the responsibility that we have. That was another thing I used last week, and I'll reemphasize it. Our responsibility. Your responsibility is your ability to respond, and your responsibility for your ability to respond. Does that make sense? Your ability to respond. So that is where our free will lies, and that's why we are responsible for our actions, and that's why we reap what we sow. And it is totally just that we do. So that is what that quote says to me. Okay. Does help. Okay. Eleanor says, that's helpful, Matthew. Kind of like having blinders on to block out whatever else is screaming for your attention. Yeah. So that's what you're saying about what he said, being aware of everything in the moment. Right. Eleanor says, like literally screaming. Right. Small children screaming. Yes. I totally feel you. Matthew A says, so as long as the screaming isn't serious, some screaming is just, I'm tired, I'm hungry, or I'm bored. Right, that's what I was saying. Like, the child is fed, the child is not injured, they'll be okay, okay? And that is life, right? That is how we gain emotional maturity. From childhood into adulthood, you go from being totally in a panic mode anytime you have any negative emotion to being able to handle the negative emotion and transmute it with your reason and understanding. And that's something that we're going to talk about here. Well, it's already been half an hour. Okay, my goodness. I was like, we're going to talk about it, but I'm like, do we actually have time to talk about these things? I mean, it happens all the time, and I'm like, I've got all these things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about this and this and this and this and this and this. It's a whole hour and a half I have, but not really. Knowing the difference screams and only allow yourself to rescue when the screaming is real. Yes, thank you, Matthew. Matthew says, that's actually what the ER doctors said. They listen for the higher level alerts around them. Interesting. So there you go. That's the truth bomb here, Eleanor. If you're a mom of small children, just think about like you're an ER doctor. Okay? All right. Uh-oh. They can't find the page. I don't know why that was there. All right. Oops. There we go. We're back online. We're back. All right. Where were we? Let's take a look. I think we're on inertia. So now let's take a look at discord changing into empathy. So discord it's kind of similar to conflict, but it's more like not being aligned with someone. By the way, you can join our Discord if you go to our website. That's a good plug for that one. And hit the like and subscribe buttons. Hit the plugs whenever I can here. So Discord is, the word actually means like not being in harmony. And so I think of like two people that are trying to talk to each other and it's not landing. Like the two of them are really just not getting through to each other. It's almost like they're on a different wavelength. That's what discord would mean. And then we get to empathy, which is the goal. Instead of being out of sync with the person, we have empathy and we can understand where they're coming from through discernment. So discernment being our intuition and our ability to kind of filter through the noise and see what's true in the situation. So I feel like this is very similar to what we were talking about above with intolerance into understanding. I feel like discernment here is similar to understanding. So codependence, sensitivity, and sacrifice. I feel like this one is very interesting to me. Codependence being someone who is dependent on someone, and often it's a pathological relationship because the person has become so dependent on this other person, and the other person is perhaps enabling them. So they're both dependent on each other. One is like the victim, and the other one is the rescuer. There's a lot of relationships that are like this, where both people are kind of broken, and they enable each other to stay in like this negative place or this dysfunctional place. And so codependence being changed into sacrifice, which is like the opposite of that. Instead of asking the other person to sacrifice themselves, we sacrifice ourselves through sensitivity to, basically the other person, but also everything in our life. Someone who's become codependent is no longer sensitive to the world around them. They've kind of insulated themselves through their codependency. And so this one is a bit deeper, and this is my take on it, so maybe it's not what Richard meant, but the idea that codependence can be cured through sensitivity because you're breaking out. Hey, you hear that thunder? Just so you know, we got big storms right here right now, and if the broadcast goes out, you know why. That's why. So I don't know if you guys follow me. That one's a little harder to understand. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but basically the idea being that codependence and sacrifice are like the opposite, because in codependence you're basically asking the other person to sacrifice, but in the light version of that, you are the one who is sacrificing. Okay. This is a great one. I love this one, especially because I've been talking about this a lot. Complexity turning into quintessence through simplicity. In case you don't know what the word quintessence means, it basically means like the very core of something. So you could almost think of it as the most simple version of something, like the quintessence of light or of love. Like what is the distilled essence of it? The most pure, simple version of that thing. that is why it goes with simplicity. And yeah, Yale says, love a big storm. Yes, I'm following on this. Yeah, it's storm season here. We get a lot of big storms. Sometimes they can get a little scary. We get some hail. So hopefully nothing crazy will happen behind me. You can see and hear the rain probably. And yes, I'm following on this. Okay, that's great. I'm glad you're following me. I thought it was a little bit of a reach, but whoa, whoa, is everybody okay? I'm happy I still have power and internet. That's pretty good. It says I only have 2.5% drop frame, so that's not bad. All right, so complexity, yeah. So this one, to me, really matches up well with our scale of consciousness here. Let's see. So simplicity being oneness with God. Like, just pure God, like even before God created anything, all there was God, all was God, we were all with God. And that is the ultimate simplicity. And then the ultimate complexity, it's like I can't even talk, it's so loud. No. Reconnection successful. All right, now that's never happened, so I don't know if I'm live. Can you guys tell me in the chat if I exist? My it says I'm still live. Reconnection successful. Oh, thank you for the updates, Yale. I really appreciate that. It says now that maybe I'm live and back. Okay. Well, I'm glad that it doesn't end the stream. That's awesome. It's back and forth, loving the storm. Yeah. Thank you for the updates, Yale. I really appreciate that. Okay. Well, hey, it looks like we're live, so I'm going to keep going. So I don't know where I lost you. I'll go over it again. Basically, we were talking about this one, complexity and simplicity. Let's zoom in even more on it. Complexity being the furthest from God and simplicity being the closest to God. And through practicing simplicity, you can understand the quintessence, which is the very core feeling or the core energy coming from whatever it is that you are able to simplify down. So I really like that one. I think it applies almost all the time. Something that's really complicated, I was saying it's of the devil. And simplicity is from God. Like, it is very simple to know what the right thing to do is. That doesn't mean it's easy, right? Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. But it does mean that it's easy to know, right? It doesn't mean that it's easy to do. All right. Let's continue. Oh, and don't forget to put your emotion in the chat if you want to talk about it. And like I said before, if you want to talk about anything, just let me know, okay? All right. Let's look at some of these. You know, there's a lot of them, and it's already been almost 40 minutes. So maybe I'll save the next page for a little bit later and get into some of the other stuff because I think it's even more helpful. So I have this whole section circled. Let's see, which one do I really want to talk about? Well, this number 27, it's a special number for me. I like that number 27. Selfishness into selflessness through altruism. I mean, is that not what the way of service is all about? That's what everything I talk about on this channel is. Turning selfishness into selflessness through altruism. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this chart is trying to take that gift and see how it connects to the negative and the positive. So basically, selfishness is like an attention to our own needs, or is an attention to our own needs. And then altruism is an attention to someone else's needs. So it's almost kind of a similar energy. It's like the same kind of action. It's just instead of being inwardly focused or, focused on our own lives, we're able to focus on someone else's life. And then the ultimate expression being selflessness. Yeah, half-heartedness into devotion through commitment. That's very similar to inertia, determination, and invincibility, right? Desire, lightness, and rapture. it's interesting here. So desire is like a heavy form of, it's like something that weighs on you, right? Another great Lao Tzu quote: if you want to know the limitation of something, desire it. Because when you desire the thing, you will then see its limitation in actually bringing you happiness. So desire is like a heaviness. And so the cure to that is to lighten ourselves and lighten our desires, move our desires out, and basically not have desire, right? And that leads to rapture, which is like a freeing and like an ecstatic feeling of no longer feeling weighed down by this desire. Arrogance into humility through leadership. That's interesting, right? So leadership and arrogance, they feel very close to each other. But leadership is like the positive form of arrogance, right? And it's interesting that ultimately that leads to humility. That's a lesson that we talk about a lot on this channel. We talked about it with the quotes, you know. Let's see if I can actually pull it up. I was hoping to find the quote from Jesus about those who will be first will be last, and those who are last shall be first, right? So that is how humility is actually a core tenet of leadership. We create leadership through humility. It's almost, some of these things, you know, you think of it as like this to this to this, but it's actually, you know, the last thing, humility, is part of being a good leader, and then you're taking that same energy of arrogance and using it also. So it's almost like humility and arrogance are blended together in leadership. So all of these act a different way. That's one reason this chart is not so straightforward. But like I said, it's packed with good information. So I wanted to share another chart. This chart I took from Mark Passio. I was watching some Mark Passio. I shared some with Yale. And this chart, to me, shows a really good framework for understanding the two aspects of a positive and a negative aspect of life, right? So as he puts it here, there's the expression, thought, emotion, and action. And then there's the fulfillment, and then there's the failure, right? So ignorance is the opposite of knowledge. Foolishness is the opposite of understanding. Naivete being the opposite of wisdom, right? So if we're going to go from foolishness into a positive thing, we need to understand, right? For example, when we find that we're ignorant, we need to seek the knowledge. This chart, it's kind of straightforward, but I thought it was useful to look at, especially because it's divided into these sections. So emotion, the fulfillment of positive emotion is true care, empathy, and compassion. And the failure is apathy, indifference, and callousness. So that relates, I feel like that's very close to this chart. Where when you don't have the positive aspect, you are stuck in the failure, right? You're stuck with apathy and basically inertia, right? And then with action, we see courage, willpower, and persistence. Those all came in, right? Persistence versus cowardice, laziness, and submission. Those are all in the same negative aspect, right? Submission to our inertia, to somebody else's will, cowardice to take action, and laziness, that word relates to inertia to me as well. So one reason, I didn't pull it up. I want to pull it up. So this chart is really one of the great charts from Mark Passio. And this is related to there's a lot of different psychological frameworks that follow this kind of idea. Basically, you know, like I don't think Mark Passio came up with this, but he did create the image. The traumatic or chronic abuse occurs, and then we have three choices. We either identify with the abuser, we identify with the victim, or we apply knowledge, care, and will. And again, that correlates right with this chart. Okay? So what he's saying is that when, care, willpower, and knowledge, those are the three sections that he brings. That's mind, body, and spirit, right? So those are the cures for these negative emotions, these negative states: knowledge, care, and courage. So, or willpower. That is where you want to be. But most people, when something bad happens, they end up either identifying with the abuser or they identify with the victim. When they identify with the abuser, they turn negative emotions in towards themselves, they turn their negative emotions out towards others, right? So they start blaming others, and then they become an abuser as well. So you can see how the cycle continues. And right here, experiencer abuses others, that brings you back to the top, right? Or they abuse themselves, that brings you back to the top. The only way to escape is through this green circle. So an abuse occurs, and then the person identifies with the victim. Then they have negative emotions towards themselves, and then they continue to experience that victim situation. Okay? And then the person is in more of a situation to be victimized, or they abuse themselves. So that relates to this chart. Okay? You guys following me? I want to make sure I am live, so let me know if you guys are following me, and put in your comments. So it says I'm still live. So, and the storm is over. So it seems good. So this chart is a great corollary to that last chart that we just looked at. Okay. So basically, on the left we have a list of pretty negative experiences. This is actually the actions that you're taking in the world, and then this is what you're experiencing when you're taking those actions. So we want to go from this column on the left on the two sides to the column on the right. And the way to do these things is through that same action, right? So you'll see that all the things on this chart are knowledge, care, and willpower, okay? So if we're in a situation where we're being aggressive, let's change that energy into assertiveness. You see how it's very similar. And so we're going from being abused, right? So being a victim, maybe you're abusing with you're kind of carrying over the same cycle of violence by, say you're being abused and you're being aggressive in response. It's kind of continuing the cycle of violence instead of having a strong boundary and saying zero tolerance, right? So that's assertiveness versus aggressiveness. You're moving from addiction to sobriety. You're going from being a victim to being responsible, right? When you go from avoiding a situation to owning and dealing with the situation, you're going from being codependent to being interdependent, right? Again, that codependency is like avoiding, it's like staying insulated within a relationship with someone, maintaining the cycle of dysfunction. Many such cases, okay? That's why I'm talking about it. I see it in a lot of people that I know. This is why people's dysfunctions lead them to be attracted to and marry certain type of people or have certain type of people as friends. And it's almost like that victimizer, abuser, and there's actually another one, the rescuer, right? So there's the abuser and the victim, and then there's the rescuer. And if you habitually fall into one of these three roles, you're often continuing this codependent cycle. Hey, Matthew says, so very deep. Yale says, following. Praise Christ Yoga says, loving it. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing people because I am talking about a lot of different ideas. I'm throwing a lot of images at you. So bless you guys for following. And like I said, definitely slow me down or ask me questions. It says your live feed is about 30 seconds delay, so you see our comments 30 seconds late. Okay, that's helpful to know. Thank you so much for telling me that. That'll help me understand what's going on. All right, so where were we? Yeah, codependency and interdependent, right? So the word interdependent is a little bit more new agey. It's kind of a response to codependency, but it's like interdependent is you're not actually dependent. You're just able to work with others, right? So that's the idea. You're going from, being dependent on people and stuck in a negative cycle to being able to work with them in a healthy way, right? And that's owning and dealing with it. So we go from being dramatic to being realistic and balanced, from being isolated to being sociable, right? So being dramatic, you're isolating yourself, you're being a victim again, and instead we're reaching out, we're caring about what other people think. We're applying care in this situation to making sure that the other people are heard, right? If you're being dramatic, you're probably you're not feeling what they're feeling, or you're not understanding their emotions in the situation. I feel like that happened to me earlier today. Being passive and taking healthy risks, going from being passive to taking healthy risks, from being morose to being pleasant. That's interesting. Morose is like you're kind of scared or sad about what's happening, and so you're not going to take risks in that situation. You're going to basically continue on in the inert state, right? Inertia again. But again, can we have willpower to go from being morose to being pleasant? And once we're in that pleasant state, that's like, going from fear up to neutrality. Just being able to go that much will make all the difference, right? Eleanor says rescuing to helping is helpful to think about. Also, doing without asking for help. Rescuing to helping is helpful to think about. Also, doing without to asking for help. I'm not sure what you mean that second sentence, but I'm glad that understanding rescuing. Yeah, I kind of wish I had thrown that or in this chart. And I feel like the rescuer jumps in there with the identifying with the victim. Like a rescuer is kind of enabling a victim and also is like right there next to the victim instead of like being assertive and fixing the situation, right? All right, the next one is doing without to asking for help. Oh, that's a big one for a lot of people I know. There's a lot of people I know that won't ask for help. Going from rescuing to helping. Interesting. So they're saying that if we can change from rescuing somebody else, and maybe that's what they're saying, is like when you're stuck in this rescuing mode, you're going to do without because you're kind of in an emergency situation and you think that, I have to do it all and I'm going to save the day, right? To helping. It's almost like when you ask for help, you are getting help and you're also giving help, right? Because if you're able to ask for help in appropriate times, you're going to be that much more effective in the world. That's one of my biggest understandings from the way of service and just in general. Like if there's anything worth doing, it's going to require the help of others. Doing things all by ourselves is not correct. That's going to be a big theme in my my next video coming up. That's been a big change in my perspective over the last year. I might as well tell you, we moved out to the woods and we thought it was because we had to separate ourselves from society. And I've realized that it is neither possible nor desirable, in my opinion. So that's a whole set of information. Like I said, I'm going to go into a lot of that in my video that's hopefully going to come out next week. Working on it. It's probably going to be the best video ever. It's probably going to be 45 minutes long. The last 45-minute video that I put out was the elements video. It took me 3 weeks. This one is looking like it's going to take me 3 weeks, and hopefully it'll be that much better than the other one because I know so much more about producing videos, but that's the situation. Lots of comments about the rescuing thing. Yeah, let's talk about it. Matthew A. says, so instead of giving into your emotions, use them as sensors, helping you to know the correct response. Yes, Matthew. And I've heard this from a lot of spiritual teachers that our emotions are our guidance system. Our emotions tell us how close we are to our highest path. And that's why when we can we can get to this mode of understanding our oneness with God, we're going to have the best effect on the world, right? So this is it all works together. So yeah, how you're feeling tells you, are you thinking about things in a way that is enlightened, or are you thinking about things in a way that identifies with the body, denies the power of God or of spirit to help you, and denies all the spiritual truths that if you're listening to me, an hour into the live stream, you probably understand some of these things. So yeah. Yeah, Matthew A. says, rescuing without asking permission is no more than controlling. Susan says, most people like to help. Matthew says, sometimes rescuing is needed. Yes. Okay, so this is an important point. I'm glad you guys comment, because it helps me make these important points. This chart also does not have legitimate abuse, right? So there is, so if there, I mean, it is legitimate abuse, but in order to get out of it, we have to apply knowledge, care, and will. That is a form of rescuing. We either rescue ourselves or we're rescuing others. But there is a pathological form of rescuing where you're kind of enabling the abuse situation. You're not trying to solve it. You're identifying with the victim and with your role as a rescuer, instead of recognizing how to actually rescue, right? So it's kind of like a paradox, right? Like, of course, rescuing is necessary, just like being a victim is not, like, we shouldn't be blaming people for being victims. That's victim blaming. Like, that is like a wrong. That is wrong to do. But the idea being that sometimes people are acting like a victim when they can actually solve the problem, or if they ask for help, for example. So it's not wrong to be a victim. It's not wrong to be a rescuer. It's also not even wrong to be an abuser. The word that's used in this framework is actually persecutor, or persecutor being someone who's identifying someone who's doing wrong. So sometimes it's legitimate to be an abuser. Let's replace it with persecutor, because it's right for us to step in and stop the wrong from being done. But again, it's when we're doing this over and over, when we're a chronic persecutor, we're finding fault with other people when we shouldn't be, right? We're being harsh with other people when we shouldn't be. When we're chronically a victim, we're chronically thinking about, oh, poor me, when we should be, opening up our heart and seeing what we can do in the situation. And when we're chronically a rescuer, we're chronically thinking, oh, I have to save the situation. I need to help this person. I personally have to attend to it, instead of giving those people responsibility, right? The victim, if it's a chronic victim, we need to help them identify that they don't need to be a victim. They can get out of the situation either by changing their own perspective, or by literally physically getting out of the situation, right? All right. Going from depriving oneself to filling one's needs. Going from rebelling to cooperating. So here it's depriving oneself and rebelling. They almost don't go together, but I guess what I see is you're rebelling against your own needs, right? You're rebelling against the fact that there are needs in the situation. And so the fix to that is to start cooperating. So I feel like this could apply to both sides. Over-disclosing to being discreet. Self-hate versus self-care. Interesting. I have seen that pattern. People who over-disclose aren't protecting themselves when they do that. And so that's what this is saying. If you can start to self-care, you'll understand that certain things require discretion. People-pleasing to choosing for oneself, being filled with shame to being self-respecting. That is powerful. The people who are being people-pleasers are doing it because they feel like they are not worthy, right? And so instead of just existing and being worthy and being valuable just by themselves, They feel like they have to be pleasing all the people around them at all times. So going from that to, why did it do that? Yeah, going from that state of self-help to, going from that state of shame into self-respecting. So the word, I actually saw this recently, and I should probably just pull it up. I have a slide for it. Here we go. Self-respect. The word respect is derived from the Latin prefix re, again, and the Latin verb spectare, to look at. Only self-respect can heal self-loathing and therefore help to put humanity on the path to healing and conscience. So it means to take another look at yourself. Self-respect. To look at yourself again. Look at yourself again and recognize that you are one with God. You are a divine spirit here having a physical experience. When you have that understanding, when you don't have that understanding, you need to apply self-respect, to look at yourself again and to understand that you are worthy of protecting yourself, taking the right action despite what somebody else wants, or whatever the situation where you feel like you don't have respect for yourself. Matthew says, oversharing is a defense. Interesting. You want to expand on that? I could see that being true. Praise Christ Yoga says, McKenna is here listening with me. This part is for her. Oh, hello, McKenna. Welcome to the stream. Glad to help if I can. All right, we've only got a couple more on this page. Or maybe just one. Promiscuous to discriminating, wishy-washy to decisive. Right? So if someone is promiscuous, it's because they're wishy-washy. They aren't sure what they want, or they're kind of letting the short-term pleasure outweigh their decision about their life, right? Like if you have too many experiences with too many different relationships or lovers, you're not being decisive. You're not deciding this is what I want. And if you don't know if you want any of them, then you should be decisive in letting them go, right? So that is to be discriminating. And again, that takes willpower, right? So all of these require one of these abilities. Either knowledge, care. Knowledge is from respect. Self-respect comes from knowledge and understanding and wisdom. Looking at ourselves again. And then true care comes from the fire within, right? And our connection to our emotions and caring about how our life goes. If you don't care about where your life is going, you can just turn the screen off right now. But most people care, right? So that, and what is it true care? True care is really applying yourself, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how difficult it is to decide to do the right thing, it's doing the right thing anyways. That's what true care is. The opposite of true care being apathy or false care, right? We care about certain things a lot, but other things we don't care about, even though they all are part of our life, right? So true care is not influenced by the ego's desire to be right. And that is actually a perfect transition to another quote that I took from Mark Passio. Let's share this with you. Travis Walton said, I've come to realize that the biggest problem anywhere in the world is that people's perceptions of reality are compulsively filtered through the screening mesh of what they want and do not want to be true. Many, many such cases, my friends. Many, many such cases, right? Matthew A. says, so we must look at others as they truly are. Love one another. Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Respect, right? That we were talking about self-respect, looking at yourself again. But again, having respect for someone else is to look at them again, right? To look again and to not just, dismiss them as whatever it is. That's not respectful, right? True respect is recognizing that other people are also divine and worthy of proper treatment. Praise Christ Yoga says, that part's for Brooke Ann. OMH, I keep going. You're going to hit us all. That guy looks like a creepy wax figure. Oh, poor Travis. He's a real guy, right? Ryan says hello. Welcome to the stream, Ryan. Glad you could join us. All right, so we were talking about this chart, and then I shared, the respect. That's right. Yes. Okay. Here we go. This one. So this chart's really useful, I believe, because all of the things on the left are negative, but then the one on the right is just a nice little tweak to move you a little bit up the emotional scale, right? Again, everything's about moving up the scale just a little bit. One of the things that I found about this chart is I realized, for example, afraid changing into uncomfortable. This is a really good example of recognizing that there's really no reason to be afraid. So if you're afraid, you are uncomfortable. Your life is never really in danger. And so when we feel fear, our brain, our body can't tell the difference between our life is being threatened and a bad social situation is about to happen. One actually threatens our lives and one actually probably doesn't matter at all, right? We think that people care about us way more than they actually do. So I think sometimes it is correct to feel these negative emotions, but almost always it's actually correct to spin them in a positive way because the negative emotion is not actually going to serve you. And again, and as Matthew said, it's like a signal to you. If you're feeling afraid, it's a signal that you need to apply self-respect. Look at yourself again, look at your situation, and now move up the scale. And that's what the spiritual work is often. So we can change angry to disenchanted, right? We can change anxious into expectant. I don't know if I have that picture. Yeah, so this chart, I thought that this was pretty interesting. Some of these don't make a lot of sense to me, but this chart is a combination of these emotions, okay? So the basic emotions being serenity, acceptance, apprehension, they're the ones in the middle. Ecstasy, admiration, terror, amazement, grief, loathing, rage, and vigilance. So when we combine those in this chart, we get these other emotions. So that's what, the anxious, that's what brought me over to this chart. I want to connect it. So going from anxious to expectant, we go back to this chart. Anxiety is anticipation plus fear. So if we can change the fear to trust, we actually change anxiety into hope. Does that make sense? This is like emotional alchemy. I think this is fascinating stuff, but it is a little bit complex, and we are working with a lot of different frameworks here. So I'm hoping I'm keeping you guys understanding. So again, if we can change, let's say we change fear into joy, we change anxiety into optimism. Okay? So let's go back to this chart and see if we can continue to see some of the connections. Confused to curious. That's a perfect spin, right? If you're confused, instead of feeling embarrassed and annoyed, become curious, right? Again, and all these things run together, right? So, curiosity right here. Trust plus surprise. So instead of fear and surprise, or let's see if there's any more surprise and anger, that's outrage, right? So maybe you'd be outraged because you're confused. Sometimes that happens when people don't understand something, they get angry. So that's surprise and anger, or surprise and disgust. It gives you unbelief. But if you can change that disgust or anger into trust, now you have curiosity. Okay. All right. What time is it? It's 3:40. We got 20 minutes left. If there's anything you guys want to talk about, let me know now because we only have about 20 minutes left. And I'm going to continue to go through this. I'm actually pretty excited because I went through most of the material that I wanted to share. This chart being one of the last things. I just want to make sure. Yeah. I've got more from Mark Passio. There's just so much great stuff from Mark Passio. So let's burn through this list, and then I'll show you one more thing from Mark Passio, hopefully in the next 20 minutes here. All right. All right, so depressed into on the road to a turnaround, right? So this is just like a step, just one step up from being depressed. That's a tough one. You know, I know that depression affects a lot of people, and it's very hard to get out of. I think what it's saying here is to just have a little bit of a positive spin. It's like, yes, I might be depressed and sad now, but you know what? I'm on the road to a turnaround, right? Destroyed, setback, right? Something really bad happens. I know I've felt this way many times, especially with the market crashing. If anybody's paying attention to that right now, it's a setback, right? It's just a difficulty that you're going to overcome. That's what life's about. Disgusted to surprised. That lines up perfectly with this other chart, right? Yeah, disgust into surprise. So when we convert disgust, let's say disgust and joy, that's an interest. That's a kind of a scary. Like I said, some of these are a little weird. Let's go with disgust and anticipation. That's cynicism. If we can change disgust into surprise, we don't have anticipation. But if we can change surprise, or let's say surprise and joy, then we get delight, right? So we go from cynicism to delight through changing those two emotions. Yeah, again, if a situation makes you feel disgusted, is it really that bad? Maybe you're just surprised, I know. I feel like that applies a lot when you're raising small children, right? It's like, that's disgusting. Yeah, it's just a little surprising. Dread into challenge. Again, that's a big one. When you're facing something difficult, can you rise to the challenge? Exhausted into recharging. That's a big one. I often feel sometimes I feel happy when I'm exhausted. It's like, this is great. I'm actually going to be able to fall asleep. It's a good reason to avoid screens, because I feel like when I don't look at screens close to going to bed, I can actually feel that feeling of exhaustion and go to sleep. But when I'm looking at screens, it's really hard to end up getting good rest and recharging. Ryan says, last I looked, gold is holding steady. That's right. If only everything that I owned was made out of gold. Eleanor says, this chart seems to take a negative emotion to one that is actionable on the right. For example, stress to busy. Busy suggests action where stress is kind of amorphous. That's helpful, Eleanor. Thank you. Yes, that's right. All the things on the left are basically like an inert state that if you focus on that emotion, you're just going to get stuck. And the thing on the right, like you said, it's turning your energy outward and towards something that's going to allow you to move away from this negative emotion. Also irritated to stimulated. Stimulated suggests you can destitute, where irritated is kind of just static. Oh, stimulated suggests you can destimulate. Oh yeah, I see. Right, that makes sense. Yeah, it looks like you got further down there. Yeah, impatient to anticipating, right? That's an interesting one. When you're impatient, it's because you're anticipating the future. And that goes right back into what we were talking about before. If you want to cure your impatience, be in the present moment. Anticipating and looking into the future is going to make you anxious. Failure, changing into getting educated. That's a good one, right? That's a tough one. But that's That's always what people say, right? When you lose, don't lose the lesson. That's a Dalai Lama quote. Uh, so when you fail, it's really a lesson in life. That's what you're supposed to look at it as. Furious into passionate, right? So if you're really angry about something, it is, and I've felt this way, indignant about my fury, but you need to channel that into a positive expression. If you're passionate, that's what you should be expressing, especially with your loved ones. If you're furious at your loved ones, it's good to reframe it for them as to be like, look, I just really care about this. I really care about you. I really care about our relationship. That's why I'm so angry, and I need to not be angry. So I'm sorry that I'm angry. I'm being passionate, right? Um, all right, irritated into stimulated. Eleanor covered that for us. Jealous into over loving. That's a good one, right? Lazy into storing energy, right? Yeah, I mean, there's a time to be lazy, right? There's a time to rest. It's not just, and it's not just rest, right? That's why they call it R&R, rest and relaxation. There's a time to be relaxing and to recreate, RR&R, rest, relax, and recreate, right? That's when I wish I could tell some of the people that I know a little more. I'm gonna hit that note a few times. Um, lonely into available. Interesting. Yeah, if you're feeling lonely, reach out to a friend. I know that works for me. I do it a lot. I end up being the one to reach out a lot because I feel lonely often. But I feel like that's a really good one. If you're lonely, you're actually available. You're available to reach out. So do it. Lost into searching. Yeah, that makes sense. Recognize that if you're feeling lost, it just means you need to search for something. You need to find the next thing. Overwhelmed into maximized. I feel like that's totally related to what we were talking about earlier, Eleanor. That's what I was saying. You're feeling overwhelmed. You don't know how to stay in the present moment. Recognize that you're maxed out. And just recognizing that you're maxed out is going to help you start to take care of yourself, pull yourself back from that state. That's what we were talking about earlier. I love when this stuff works together. I don't know if it's synchronicity or logic or both. That is how the universe works. Logic is synchronicity, is God, is spirituality, is science. They're all the same. They all work together, okay? Nothing disagrees. And if you disagree, let me know, because that's where the most interesting conversations can be had. We got 12 minutes left. Yeah, all right, no more chats for now. Where were we? Lonely, lost, overwhelmed, rejected, overlooked. Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, especially people romantically, if you're single, if you're out there trying to find a mate and you feel rejected, it's usually not about you, right? I mean, there's something probably that you can learn from it, but most of the time, I would probably go as far as to say 90% of the time, it's not you. It's the other person's life, it's their biases, and they're just overlooking you, and it's their loss. That's the way it is. Not that you shouldn't work on yourself and learn from the situation, right? Again, failure is getting educated. Going from scared to excited is similar to, anxious into expectant. Sick into cleansing. I've definitely felt that way. Sometimes I feel like I get sick because I need to rest. I get sick, maybe you ate something bad. I mean, that could be a reason. But often a period of being sick, it's like an excuse to slow down. It's an excuse to start taking care of yourself. So I agree with this. Sick can be spun into cleansing. Rejected to overlooked. That one is intense. Yeah, I'm glad it means something to you, Eleanor. I think that one's tough to remind ourselves, because we often think that our value comes from other people. Our value comes from our external feedback. And almost all the time it's the opposite, right? Other people are not thinking about you. They're just going through their life. They're trying to take care of themselves. They're trying to deal with their own problems. And so, yeah, it's just being overlooked. I mean, most of the time, and like rejected doesn't have to just apply to romantic relationships, right? It's like rejected in a conversation, or rejected by a friend because you wanted to make plans with them or you wanted to talk to them about something and they just kind of blew you off. And it's not because of you, it's because of them. It's their life. Their life might be really busy. Maybe you don't know what they're going through. Again, to understand everything is to forgive everything, right? Yeah. Eleanor says, totally agree. It's not about you. That's what I'm saying. Yes. All right. Scared to excited. We just talked about sick. Okay. Stressed to busy, right? That's similar to overwhelmed. It's like, I'm just really busy. And, you don't have to be stressed about it. You can take a deep breath and release the stress and recognize that you're busy, right? Going from stupid to discovering. Yeah. Some of these are repeating. That one's like above. It's like you're lost, you're stupid, you're confused. Instead, you're curious, you're searching, and you're discovering. And terrible into different, right? That's a big one. We all have our strong points and our negative points, our strengths and our weaknesses. And if there's something that you're weak at and you think you're terrible for that thing, recognize that you are just different. There are things that you are strong in, so that just makes you different, right? It's true. It sounds cheesy, but it's true. All right, let's go back to chat here. Praise Christ Yoga says, I love that quote. She says, to understand everyone is to forgive everyone. That is when we become one. I love it. Yeah, isn't it such a good quote? That's such a good quote. And it's so true, To understand everything is to forgive everything. And if we can remember that, you can just forgive it ahead of time. Because it's like, I'm not going to understand everything. But if I did, I can forgive, right? And that's what Laurel Jackson says in my afterlife video. She said the two most important things in our life is forgiveness and gratitude, right? So forgiveness really helps us deal with the negative emotions, and gratitude allows us to amplify our positive emotions. And those two words allow us to just follow this emotional scale, Forgiveness sends you up, and then gratitude, once you're up here, sends you even further up. All right, we've got 7 minutes left, and I wanted to share this work that Mark Passio has. So most people are familiar with the idea that the brain is divided into two halves. The left side of the brain governing our intellect, which is our logic, our analytical thought, science and math. And then the right side of the brain governing our intuition, our creativity, our holistic thought, and our compassion. And so what happens is, in our world, if people are too focused on one side or the other, they end up dysfunctional. And that's what he says here. We get a mental schism when we rely too much on the masculine or the intellect, or when we rely too much on the intuition or the feminine. Relying too much on the masculine can lead to rigid skepticism, scientism, which is basically the belief that there's only the material world, which is atheism, solipsism, which is where we believe we are the only one in the world that matters, moral relativism, social Darwinism, right? The ends justify the means, treating people poorly, and authoritarianism. Now, when the right side of the brain dominates and we don't have we don't allow the intellect, we end up a victim. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that point. I don't know if it's a different slide. Yeah, I guess I don't have the slide for it, but basically the two sides. Maybe it's this slide. Yeah, so when we're stuck in the left brain, we're in master think, and when we're stuck in the right brain, we're in slave think. So this is the victim and the abuser, okay? Chronic left brain leads to dominance and the suppression of emotion, and eventually roots us in the reptile brain. Slave think keeps us in right brain dominance, creates a suppression of the survival instinct, which is the reptilian brain, and roots us in the mammalian brain. And then the highest level is the human brain. So there's 3 levels. There's the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and the human brain. Sorry, we're going through a lot really fast here, but I hope you understand. Basically, the idea is there are 2 ways to be extreme. One leads to being an abuser. The other leads you to being a victim. And the way out is to use our knowledge or our human brain to connect with our spirit and to do the right thing and to unify the left and the right brains. So to both have intellect and intuition, to have respect for logic and also have respect for holistic thought, right? To be able to be coldly analytical, but also to have compassion. So being on the left or the right brain dominant, we can be religiously extreme. We have the self-loathing, the unworthiness. It ends up being a willing slave or an order follower. Here's a really good diagram of the worldview that we end up with if we have either or of these 2. And I see this a lot, right? So people are either over here, the universe is a grand accident, there is no creator and no underlying intelligence, or they're on the other side and they say God creates everything in creation, everything is preordained, free will is an illusion. I literally have had this conversation. Free will is an illusion from people who have this deterministic view of God and the universe. And it's not true. The truth is the connection of these 2 things, right? There is a creator, but also we have free will, right? There is spiritual and moral law. So this is when you end up left brain dominant, you have the scientism, the atheism, and the totalitarianism. And then on the right brain dominance, you have religious extremism and slave think, or not trying to take action in the world. That's really what happens on the right brain. It's like this person is trying to take too much action in the world. They're trying to use brute force to create what they want. And this person believes that they don't have to take any action in the world. And so they take no action. They end up a slave to other people. So the work of Mark Passio goes deep. He's got thousands of hours of material. It's fantastic. I recommend it. But it's too much to get into in the last 10 minutes of a live stream. So, all right, let's close it out here. We got 2 minutes. I want to chat with you guys. Let's see what you have to say. Star of David balance. Yeah, I actually don't know why Mark Passio used the Star of David on that slide. It's very interesting. Oh, I do know why. I'm sorry. The combination of this is like the symbol for fire and this is the symbol for water. And when you combine them, you get the Star of David. So that's another thing Mark Passio is fantastic at. He sees the hidden symbolism in so many of the things that so many of the systems, like this comes from Hermeticism. You can see how Hermeticism ties into Judaism because they both use these symbols. So there's a lot of material here. That was something that I realized today I felt good about. I was like, sometimes I'm like, oh, do I have enough to talk about? I got to get this ready, get this ready, get this ready. It's like, I have so much to talk about. In fact, I have too much to talk about because sometimes we can start to get into tangents and things. So there's a lot to talk about in all these different topics. Yeah, so we got 2 minutes. Hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. I love you for being here. I love talking with you. If you have any more questions or comments, I will answer them now. Like I said, join our Discord. Go to wayofservice.com. There's a link to the Discord right there. You can chat with us every day. Sign up for the newsletter. I'm giving away free coaching to people who sign up for the newsletter. And I'm excited to release my video next week. If you've watched this long, I'll tell you that it's going to be called 44 Spiritual Insights I Learned from 20 to 40. So the last 20 years of my life distilled down into 44 insights. And again, there's no way I can cover all the insights I want to share, but this is a really exciting, fun list of insights that I came up with. Some of the most powerful ones with personal stories behind every single one of them. Really excited to get it out. I'm kind of like, I want to say I'm halfway done. Maybe I'm halfway done. I think I am. but it's taking a long time. I'm a one-man operation over here, all right? So anyways, Matthew, for those of you who like cartoons, Avatar: The Last Airbender teaches those things too. Yes, I used a lot of Avatar: The Airbender in my Elements video. Magic number 4. Yes. That's another video I'm going to put out, is that if you watched one of the live streams, I went over the synchronicity of the fours. So that's another teaser. I'm going to put that video out eventually. Got a lot of plans, and like I said, I'm a one-man operation, so they take me a little while to enact. But the best part is hanging out with you guys right here every Friday from 2:30 to 4 p.m. I hope to see you next week. I love you, and I will see you